So, I thought we'd do a little bit of a different video now. I absolutely love history, and therefore I thought we could do a topic I know quite a lot about. Let me just try and find it. American Civil War. This is 3 years ago now. You know what? I'm just gonna search for it. Oversimplified. So I'm going to try and de-simplify it.
The world of 1914, a time of modern technology, culture, and fashion. Truly the height of civilization.
Yeah, no.
Let's have a war.
That's
Everyone
how a
knew
lot of
big
it
war
was, actually.
France wanted some stuff back that Germany had taken from it. Germany wanted to take more of everyone's stuff, and they were building a big, sexy navy that was making the British uncomfortable.
Yeah,
These
there
two
was
empires thought they were really cool.
there was a sort of arms race in the early part of the 1900s and it was who could build the most amount of dreadnoughts and it was Britain and Germany. Britain managed to win, but they didn't actually use them in the war. So,
but lots of different people who lived there didn't think it was so cool.
Ukrainians,
and some of them had even been declaring independence with help from Russia. Everyone was talking about each other behind each other's backs, throwing the fact that military technology...
That queen was from Poland and Spain, because they kind of weren't involved in the war. They were neutral, except Poland did join in 1916. And I think it was because of a treaty. I think it was because of an alliance between Britain and Poland. Alliance between... not Poland, Portugal. First World War, yeah, there. I think it's like 13th century. Yeah, that was the one, and they actually managed to do it after that long. It was quite interesting, in my opinion, because it showed an actual alliance between two countries that had lasted
a long way since the last major war, and suddenly everyone was pretty eager to beat each other up. In this area of Austria-Hungary lived some Serbs and Bosnians who hated living in Austria-Hungary. So the Austro-Hungarian Archduke Franz Ferdinand goes there for a nice drive in an open-top car with his cars republished in advance. And that went just about as well as you'd expect. Some assassins were waiting for him along the way and threw bombs at his car, but they missed and blew up some officers behind him instead. So the Archduke goes into hiding, leaves Sarajevo, and the whole war never happens. Except no, the Archduke doesn't leave, but instead goes back out in the open-top car to visit the injured officers in hospital. The driver takes a wrong turn and by sheer coincidence gets stuck beside one of the failed assassins.
Oh.
Who shoots him.
Oh, yeah.
Austria-Hungary is understandably pissed about all this, and they think the Serbian government had something to do with it, which they might have. So they go to their ally Germany and say, hey Germany, we're going to declare war on Serbia, and Germany is all for that. So Austria-Hungary sent a big list of impossible demands to Serbia, and when Serbia refuses, they declare war.
And then Russia
Austria-Hungary and Germany are friends, and Serbia is protected by Russia, who's friends with France, so they'll declare war on each other. Montenegro joins in too.
Because Montenegro.
France and Britain also have a kind of alliance. So when France says, hey Britain, you got my back? Britain is like, Maybe. And then they decide to stay out of it, which is great for Germany, because Germany has a plan. They know that Russia is so big and clumsy that it will take them a while to get ready for war. So with this guy in charge, Germany will send all its troops into France at lightning speed while Russia's getting ready, defeat France, then move all the troops to Russia and defeat Russia, then we all speak German and eat Pfefferpotast every day. Just one problem.
German food, mostly consisting of beetroot and I think mash.
France has loads of forts and defenses along its German border, and Germany can't waste any time fighting them, so Germany decides to go around them, through Belgium.
And then Britain
Belgium is
comes
neutral, But Germany wants to march 750,000 troops through it to get around France's defenses. They're hoping Belgium will just
And Belgium
sit
wouldn't
down and shut
let
up,
it, and they
but
actually
don't.
fought
They
really
fight
well
back,
against them.
and they're pretty good too, so they slow the Germans down. What's worse is that Britain shows up, and they're pretty pissed that Germany's invading neutral countries. So now Britain declares war on Germany.
There we
Germany
go.
push on through Belgium and commit some atrocities along the way.
The Triple Entente, named by the French president at the time, the Triple Entente. And it was actually really interesting how it all kind of played out.
They also wear spikes and sometimes skulls on their uniform. So if you're trying to not look like the bad guys, good job. The Allies have a propaganda extravaganza, and this starts having an influence around the world, notably in America.
The Rape of Belgium is a name given to it because they tried to make it look as evil as possible. And it kind of was. And some of the lies was they were making, I think one of the lies was that the British and the Belgians were actually making ice cream out of eyes.
The US President Woodrow Wilson sees himself as a bit of a Jesus figure and spends most of the war
Hate Woodrow Wilson. Wilson is the worst.
trying to get everyone to just hug it out. But there's also a large population of ethnic Germans living in the United States, and when the war first broke out, they were like, yay, Germany. But now that they're committing atrocities in Belgium, they're less enthusiastic. Let's play Spot the French Soldier.
There. Yeah, the French uniform was rubbish.
Easy, right? He's wearing a bright blue uniform with red trousers. And do you know who else spotted him easily too?
The German soldiers.
So when the French were slowly marching in columns through the countryside, the Germans easily tore them to shreds with their giant guns. All the nations involved in this war went in with an old-school war mentality, and all of them had to update their uniforms and tactics a lot during the Great War.
But the French was the worst,
because
definitely.
This war was going to be like nothing anyone had ever seen before. Russia's ready for war.
Yeah, they were
earlier than expected.
They were ready much earlier than they thought, but they were still really slow. Another problem with them was they were led by Tsar Nicholas II. Like, he controlled the army, he was there with the army, leaving his German wife in charge while they were fighting the Germans and Rasputin. Not a very good look.
Austria-Hungary?
There was also a scandal between the Tsarina having a relationship with Rasputin. That hasn't been disproven, but it might be. It might have been true, it might not have been. It's still unknown.
You get on top of that? Oh yeah, sure, we've got this. Nope. So Germany has to send some troops back to the east to defend against the Russians. The chief of staff of the Austro-Hungarian army is this guy, and although he is handsome, he turns out not to be the best military strategist. Austria-Hungary constantly ignores Germany's advice, and then comes running back to Germany whenever they get in trouble. Austria-Hungary even gets its ass kicked by tiny Serbia, who repels all their invasion attempts.
Serbia is just a tiny state that used to be part of the Austro-Hungarian Empire.
Back on the Western Front, the Germans continue
I don't even count the Austro-Hungarian Empire as an empire. I think it's just more of a collection of cultures. You know, the Ukrainians, the Romanis, the Slavs, the Serbs, and so on.
And are in sight of Paris.
The people from Kosovo, I forget what they're called.
At this point, anyone would be forgiven for thinking the Germans were going to get that quick victory after all. But then things start to go wrong. The French commander-in-chief knew something had to be done, and he ordered his armies to stop retreating. In the resulting battle, a gap opened up in the German line.
Now, the Battle of Marne was quite an important battle because after the battle, they tried to get through to Belgium, I think, so that they could capture a really important seaport. Because if they captured that seaport, then it meant that they could do a lot more there and get supplies into France and Britain much easier without the Germans interfering as much.
If a gap opens up, the enemy can use it to flank you from the side and behind, so the German armies have to retreat. The Allies launch a counterattack, so the Germans dig into defensive positions.
Now, trenches hadn't been used before. Like, they were kind of used in the Boer Wars in South Africa. The British kind of used them, but they weren't as much used. And now I think that the trenches were the reason why the war lasted for so long, because you had the fact of they were more defensive. positions and not offensive. If they were more offensive positions, then the war could have lasted much less time, but because they're defensive, they don't work as well.
Do the same. Then both sides move north, trying to outflank each other along the way. When they reach the sea, they're in a stalemate with trench systems running the whole way from the coast to Switzerland, the beginning of trench warfare on the Western Front. Here's how trench warfare works. 2 opposing lines of trenches with no man's land in between.
What they used to do is they would target the the barbed wire, but often it wouldn't break, so the Germans would aim for the gaps, because they have to aim for the gaps, and the British and French had to go through the gaps. It would create a lot of casualties.
One side would pummel the other with hundreds of thousands of artillery shells, sometimes for days at a time. This had a huge psychological effect on the soldiers, leaving many.
And this is where the term shell shock comes from, which is basically just being afraid of it, and the hyper extensive mindset that it is. And to be honest, I'm not surprised that they were like that, because they were pummeled every single time.
Then the attacking troops would leave their trenches and rush across.
These days it's called post-traumatic stress disorder.
Craters and barbed wire. The defending trench would unleash machine gun fire on the attackers, inflicting thousands of casualties. The attackers would send wave after wave until either they gave up or the opposing trench was finally overrun. There would be months of fighting and the deaths of thousands in order to gain a few meters or kilometers of land. Living in the trenches was hard work too. Corpses, mud that could swallow you whole, pools of poisonous water.
So that tree could have actually been a sniper point. They started using snipers in World War I, and they would hide in things that looked like dead horses, the carcasses of horses, or even just the carcasses of trees.
Rats, disease, the smell. It's insane that millions of soldiers put up with these conditions, and commanders ordered them to do so for years.
And still, millions lived. We'll watch the other video, because these are quite short videos.
With both sides stuck in a hard stalemate, they knew this war wasn't going to be about
Around
taking
the Battle of
territory,
Somme.
but about simply wearing each other down. The Allies had plenty of men to expend from its overseas dominions, and the British also started a naval blockade, so Germany couldn't import
so that
stuff
Germany
like
couldn't
food.
get anything.
Neither side really wanted a
And that
long-ruling war,
actually is one of the reasons that we won the war.
Idea number 1, new frontiers. When the war first broke out, Australia was quick to take German New Guinea.
Yeah.
The Allies also quickly jumped on Germany's colonies in Africa.
German colonies, so that they can use that to try and push through Africa into Europe.
For the native Africans. Some new combatants entered the war as well. The Allies' new friends were Italy and Japan. Japan was busy building itself an empire, so it was more than happy to take away German islands and colonies in East Asia. Italy actually had an alliance with Germany and Austria-Hungary before.
So Italy was kind of weird, because they went Axis allies, Axis allies, Axis allies, and kind of did that until the end of the war. Originally ending at World with allies.
And then the Allies promising to give them some of Austria-Hungary's stuff, they switched sides. Italy opened up a front in the mountains here, but like everyone else, they were stuck in stalemate for most of the war.
Yeah.
The Central Powers' new friend was a struggling empire in the Middle East.
The Ottoman Empire kind of went
The Ottoman were divided on whether to actually join the war or not, since they had been exhausted by the recent Balkan Wars. Some of the politicians who did want to join went off on their own and fired some shells at Russia.
Yeah, that kind of started the war for them.
Looks like we're at war now. The Ottoman entry into the war was of particular concern to the British, since the Middle East was full of oil, and Britain wanted all of that oil.
Well, we need
the
the oil for the war as well.
In the Caucasus Mountains, but they weren't prepared for the cold, and many of them froze to death.
Yeah, so this is why it's been so hard to invade Russia, because at winter they can bring in troops from Siberia who are used to the cold, which is why no one's ever been able to invade Russia. As well, it's a massively vast country, but in theory you could go from north to south and not west to east, south to north, because that's what Mongolia wants to do. Well, wanted to do, and it seems more plausible than that, because it would take less time.
Take the Suez Canal from the British, but that failed too. Then the Allies tried to take the Dardanelles at Gallipoli in a long and hard trench warfare campaign, but that also failed.
Gallipoli
The
was
Ottomans blamed their
a
initial losses on the
bloodbath.
ethnic Armenians living within Ottoman territory, and the resulting Armenian genocide led to the deaths of 1.5 million people.
See, when people talk about genocide, they talk about the World War II Holocaust, but there's been millions of genocides, and one of them being the Armenian genocide, but also the Romanian genocide, not Romanian, the Rwandan genocide of the 1990s. That was a shocking event, and yet no one talks about it as much.
Sent spies into Afghanistan to try to convince the Arab tribes there to rise up in jihad against the British and attack India. But that plan failed, partly because the spies got bored, brewed their own alcohol, and got drunk, which is a bad thing to do in Afghanistan. All these new frontiers hadn't done much to change the war. Aware that the Allies had more men and supplies than them, the Germans knew they had to do something to break the stalemate. Before the war, there was a big conference that set out the rules of modern warfare.
The Hague Conference, which is basically no chemical weapons. Well, in essence, just don't be jerks.
Weapons, no killing civilians. Basically, don't be jerks. The Germans held a meeting and decided to be jerks. Zeppelin air raids commenced over British cities. They also started attacking the Allied trenches with chlorine gas.
So around this time as well, the plane had only just been invented, but they were using it mostly for reconnaissance at the start of the war, taking pictures. And then after that, they started using it for other things, such as actually fighting. So they'd have steel darts was one, and then it was at the end of the war that they started using bombs, but Zeppelins actually started using bombs in 1915, and then from 1915 they carried on doing that, but then they were really easy targets to hit down, so they then gave up on it.
They used submarines to sink civilian ships. One such civilian ship was the Lusitania.
The Lusitania is what is known as starting the war. So it was an American boat that was bringing food and supplies to Britain, and that's why it was sunk. But America wanted to then join into the war because they'd killed the civilians.
Which had 159 Americans on board when it was sunk, further swaying US opinion against the Germans. Not to be completely unfair to the Germans, the Allies also engaged in chemical warfare soon after.
We only engaged in chemical warfare because they did. And without the war, we wouldn't have had the gas masks, which have helped us to this day in actually with nuclear radiation as well, because you don't want to breathe steam from a nuclear reactor in. So they weren't used at Chernobyl, but if they were, then it would have been a much better option. But they couldn't have been because it was just done by a team of firefighters.
And they had been hiding anti-submarine weapons on their civilian ships, which let the Germans justify their attacks. Meanwhile, Austria-Hungary still hadn't dealt with Serbia, so the Central Powers enlisted some help. Bulgaria wished it was bigger and was still bitter about losing the Second Balkan War. The Central Powers promised to make all of Bulgaria's wildest dreams come true if they helped, so they...
Bulgaria, I think, is still the same size. Let me check. Map of Bulgaria. Yeah, I think it's still the same size. Yeah, it's the same size, roughly. In fact, it looks the exact same, so yeah. They didn't try and get more land.
The Central Powers promised to make all of Bulgaria's wildest dreams come true if they helped, so they signed on, and together they knocked out Serbia. The Serbian troops retreated through Albania, which was neutral but had some ties to Austria-Hungary.
Yeah, Albania was kind of weird because it was neutral, even though it was friends with Austria-Hungary, and then it was allied, and then it was weird.
Austria-Hungary entered Albania in a friendly invasion
and then
to chase
central.
down the Serbians, many of whom escaped by sea. It's 1916, and a lot is happening, as if they didn't have enough enemies.
1916 was also when the first tank was used, Little Willie, which was a British tank with 3 wheels, and it was basically just an armoured car that could go 4 miles an hour, and that had people in it to shoot machine guns out, but the main thing was kind of just to hide behind it, was one of some of the troops did.
Already, Germany added one more to the list. Portugal had been getting a bit chummy with the Allies behind the scenes, and Germany didn't like that one bit. Around
And
the
that's
same time,
when
the only sea
that
battle
happened.
of the war happened.
Not much
Both sides
happened
had a
between
new
them.
powerful class of battleships called dreadnoughts, but they were so expensive to build that neither side wanted to risk losing them in a battle. So they kept them in port, except for one time when they had a big fight and a bunch of them got damaged, so they didn't try that again.
No.
The UK started conscripting men to the army, so they had plenty of reserves, which is just as well because the Western Front was about to get brutal.
Battle of the Somme, Battle of Verdun.
Started when the Germans launched an attack around the French city of Verdun.
Verdun was a really major battle, and that's actually how the Battle of the Somme happened. So the Battle of the Somme was meant to be a distraction for the German army, so that they would go to the Battle of the Somme, but instead of being a sideshow, it became the main show.
French defended it desperately, leading to hundreds of thousands of casualties. Under pressure, the French called on its allies to do something to draw the Germans' attention away, so the British started their own long and brutal fight, the Battle of the Somme, with 60,000 British casualties on just the first day.
In fact, you can go to the Somme to this day, and you can actually see the trenches. It's just a massive field.
It's also here that the British first used one crazy brand new piece of sci-fi technology. The Russians had been getting pushed back further and further into their own territory, but in response to the French call for help, they began a huge offensive, and did really well until they ran out of supplies and got stuck.
And then
seeing how well the Russians had been doing, Romania decided now would be a great time to jump in and win the war.
Yeah, Romania joined in, but they didn't
The
really
Greeks were
do
fighting
much.
amongst themselves about whether to join the war or not. The king liked the Central Powers, while the Prime Minister wanted to join the Allies. After a brief national schism, during which the country split into two, the king finally abdicated and the country reunited. With Allied help, they began a new offensive. In the Middle East, Russia was pushing into Ottoman territory from the north.
Yeah, I don't know why they did that. It kind of opened up two fronts for them.
Oil fields. And they had also sent a small army up the Tigris River to try to take Baghdad.
But that would
The army
never
got sieged
happen.
in the town of Kut along the way, and eventually surrendered.
Baghdad is a
New
very
offensive was launched
sacred
from
city
the south
to
with
the
all-out desert warfare.
Turks
The
and
offensive was
Ottomans.
aided by one famous British officer, better known as Lawrence of Arabia, who helped lead the Arab tribes in a revolt that wreaked havoc on the Ottoman supply lines. By the time 1917 rolled around, everyone was exhausted. There were mutinies in the French army, the German populace was starving, and the war had drained all of Russia's supplies. There was no clear winner, and it was still anyone's war. The only question now was, who was going to break first?
Yeah, that was the big question.
And the answer was Russia. Tired of not eating, and mad that a crazy magic homeless guy was calling some of the shots, there was an uprising in Petrograd, complete with riots and strikes.
And Tsarina Alexa, I think her name was. She was also a German. So one thing you have to remember is that the Tsar and Tsarina were second cousins. So their son Alexei had haemophilia, and that's why Rasputin was friends with them, because he treated him by taking him off the aspirin that his doctor prescribed, but as well because another thing was he left his German wife in charge, which doesn't help. But one reason why he didn't want to, so there was also another reason why Britain didn't want to go to war originally, was because he'd have to fight his cousin but then he'd be teaming up with his cousin anyway. So because Kaiser Wilhelm, Tsar Nicholas and King George were all cousins from Queen Victoria. Kaiser Wilhelm was the oldest grandson of Queen Victoria.
The riots turned into a full-scale revolution, and a new government overthrew the Tsar. Then a few months later, the Bolsheviks overthrew the new government, and they pulled Russia out of the war. This was great news for Germany, who now only had to focus on the Western Front. But there was still one problem.
The Southern.
The pesky United States of America was looking increasingly like it was going to join the war. America had been selling supplies to the Allies throughout the war, and was getting super rich off the back of it, meaning it was in fantastic shape. And
we
was
were
interested in the Germans.
number one
So
economy
Germany
in
sent
them
a
because we
telegram
had
to
to buy
Mexico
everything
saying,
from
"Wouldn't
them.
it be crazy cool if you guys attacked America?" But the British intercepted the message, showed it to the Americans, and that was the final straw. American troops began shipping out to Europe. This was terrible news for Germany.
But I think
They
that
knew
was
their
just
only hope now was
to make
force
an
France
excuse
and the UK
for
to
war.
surrender before the fresh American troops arrived. It was now or never, so they started one final attack. They converged their troops and hit hard at the Somme and pushed the Allies back. They hit a second time further north, then again.
At this point, everyone thought Germany would win.
The Germans were spending more and more resources, while the
But the problem was that they had one final assault. They had a counter assault, and so that managed to push them back all the way back into Germany.
The Allies were getting better and better at repelling their attacks. By the fifth punch, the Allies held the line and even pushed back. With American troops now arriving in larger numbers, the Allies launched a counterattack, and that was it. The Central Powers were being pushed back on all fronts. Bulgaria collapsed first, followed by the Ottoman Empire, then Austria-Hungary, and finally on November...
Because the Ottoman Empire fought, that's how you get the sort of look of modern Turkey.
1918, at 11 o'clock, Germany surrendered. At the peace treaty, Germany was forced to reduce its military, accept war guilt, and pay the bill for the war. Personally,
I think the Treaty of Versailles was a direct cause and effect of World War II.
Indescribable suffering and millions dead, the world learnt its lesson and never had such an awful war again. For about 20 years.
So, yeah. Like and subscribe, and if you like these videos, definitely like it and comment down below, and bye.